We had the World Wildlife Foundation talking about the chemicals into the sea. Now we've had a discussion about the report that came out previously talking about the volume of chemicals that are in the Mediterranean. And then, of course, there are all those very popular stories about those big floating plastic islands that are basically sitting out in the ocean, slowly corroding, making more and more kind of microplastics as they degrade. But a new study has come out inside of this week that basically has proven that not only does the small larvae and you know, kind of the smaller kind of filter feeders that live in the oceans, not only do they start to eat these microplastics, but they almost have a preference for these plastics and are consuming vast quantities of this. But this is having a direct impact on their reproductive ability. The toxins are so strong in them that there's roughly a 30% reduction in the ability. So if you took a whole segment of larvae, you picked it up and you see how many could reproduce by comparison to how many can reproduce in the current ocean environment, there's been a reduction by up to 30%, and there's been a reduction of almost 50% in terms of their lifespan, which means that those toxins, those chemicals, are having a direct effect, a direct impact on the lifespan of those creatures and naturally on the health of those creatures. So obviously, if you take again a look at the whole narrative, at the impact of all of the chemicals that are flooding into the oceans, the effects that are being picked up by this scientist there in the Mediterranean, this scientist there in the States picking up the impact on larvae, there in Rio, the impact of what's going on in terms of, you know, the new bacterial strains that are found inside of the oceans, it's actually quite crazy. The problem is extremely real. So I posed it to a couple of people yesterday. I said, okay, now listen, here's the problem. I told them pretty much the same story that I've told you. And a lot of it, well, I mainly posed it to women. And generally, there is, you know, in as much as there is a sense of alarm about it, there is also a sense of kind of, well, you know, what can I do? You know, they're not making the products that are using microplastics. They utilize the products that are making, that are obviously have microplastics. And so this is a problem. If you consider that over half of the world's population are female, that gives you roughly, what, 3.5 billion people. And let's assume that a large proportion of those people are able to shower and have access to kind of modern day shampoos and modern day kind of toothpaste. And if you consider the volume of plastics entering into the ocean, it's huge. Then add to this little report that came out recently in relation to you know, kind of the farming industry and how much kind of the pesticides and the kind of chemicals that they're spraying all over their crops, and what happens to those, that the chemicals are going off into the waterways and eventually into the rivers, and from the rivers into the seas. You can see that there is almost a permanent chemical runoff coming off the land. And there are very few actual alternatives to it. So what I'd like to do is this. Obviously there are some kind of, you know, generalized alternatives to this, but what I'd like to do is this. I'd like to pose whoever is watching this a challenge. I really believe that where you have a problem, you have an opportunity to resolve it. There is a dire need for high-grade, you know, kind of woman cleaning products and toothpastes and things that a person uses on a daily basis, but do not contain, you know, destructive chemicals or do not contain microplastics. There is a huge industry awaiting you. For anybody who's watching this that has the entrepreneurial ability to think up these products, bring them to market, we will, you know, on our channel, we'll even advertise them for you. Let's make this, you know, it's much easier for me to go and say, listen, here is a viable alternative to your, you know, great hair shampoo. Here's a viable alternative to your toothpaste. It's much easier to bring people alternatives that are healthy, good, and pure. Give them the information that I've just given you and allow them to make the decision. invariably, women being the nurturers amongst us, invariably make the right decisions. They don't want to eat toxins. They don't want to eat microplastics. The big predatory fish that you're finding in sushi, you know, they pulled samples from the livers. They pulled samples from the actual flank, the meat, what you eat. They are filled with microplastics. To cap this little story off, I'm going to just add a little impact. If you have been watching my shows, I basically talk a lot about sharing, you know, so sharing in the hope that what we can do is form a kind of mass movement. Because as I've always explained, we're a demographic to a political party. By having enough people of the same thinking, of the same mind, of the same concerns, it's a matter of time before new politicians start to spring up preaching the very things that we need to have done. And here is another great example of it, and I love to bring up these examples of it, but the Chesapeake Bay previously was having massive problems in terms of, you know, big ocean, lake dead zones. You know, they're absolutely depleted of any oxygen. And so the nearby city, they implemented the first kind of air quality controls and rigorously maintained these. They did this roughly about 5 years ago. Now, the result has been that, first of all, the atmosphere above the city has completely almost cleared itself. It's become cleaner, there's less smog, there's less generalized atmospheric pollution. And for the first time in this week, a report came out showing the response that the river was having to it. All the deoxygenated zones that we were seeing, both in the river, both downstream in terms of the bay that it was feeding, they have completely cleared themselves out. The river has higher oxygen content, more balanced nitrogen content, and has started to reform almost, you know, river estuaries. You know, they've started to reform the kind of life forms that would feed off these things. It's become an attractive place to go. Attractive place if you're a fish, that is, but it's become an attractive place to be. And it just goes to show you how adjustments in terms of legislation can start to bring around like immediate results. In this case, it was 5 years. Now, what I've proposed to you is a main narrative, a main story, based around microplastics, the impact that microplastics will have. I've also suggested to you a whole lot of other surrounding stories, because scientists always only focus on single pieces that are all related to this. And if you think about it, you can see the scale of this problem. But you can also see a potential resolution in the form of an opportunity. The person that brings this market something that is good, clean, healthy, does the same job in terms of making your hair smell great, in terms of cleaning your toilet so it's lemon fresh, but without destroying chemicals or nasty chemicals flooding into the ocean. And lastly, as we've already been picking up in our 5-point plan, a shift over to organic farming, for argument's sake, completely rids the flow of chemicals coming off farmlands into the waterways, into the rivers. And if you think about that last story that I had about the impact of coal ash, how it's bringing about arsenic in the various different waterways, and how it's actually being picked up by farmers' boreholes. So the reality is that these are very solvable problems, but not only are they solvable, they also are a great opportunity. And where there's great opportunity, there is great minds behind it to drive it, to make it happen. And so let's make it happen. Let's bring about that change. Let's start to drive the legislation in our areas that what we're talking about is clean air. We're talking about clean waterways. We're talking about clean products that are not destroying our oceans. And we're talking about clean forms of living that are not causing a permanent chemical runoff into our oceans. I hope you enjoyed today. I enjoyed telling you. As I said, we're going to get a news update at the end of this week where I'll bring you some really cool stories. There's been some really cool stories that have happened inside this week. Some good news, some not so good news. But generally, I think that if you consider what I've been saying, consider where we're going, I think it's time that you share this. Just click on that little share button, share it with the people that you know. Let's make it happen. Thank you so much for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Hello and good morning and welcome to Mother Channel. My name is Jason Sol, reporting for the ENN Network. It's a beautiful Sunday. Going to cover some stories that came out this week, but there's actually been some really nice summary stories that came out this week. On Friday I released a video update that was related to the basic mechanics of climate change. We received a lot of very positive support from that. We also received some negative kind of feedback from people that are clearly deniers of climate change, or rather non-believers in the concept of climate change. I tried my best in the previous update to kind of bring them into a state of reality. So I'm going to address today, first of all, some of the news, and maybe you've heard it or maybe you haven't, but I urge you to check it out for yourself. I'd like to challenge anybody watching this movie. Go onto Google and Google extreme weather news, and you will find out for yourself exactly what sort of extreme weather, which always is the frontal kind of shift in a varying climate. But go Google extreme weather, see for yourself what is happening all over the world. The events are simply catastrophic. California is in its longest drought that it's ever had, to the point of where, you know, so far 66 million trees have been reported as dying. You know, these trees, obviously they become a fire hazard. You've already seen the raging fires that are going on inside of California, and in specific in the Sierra Nevada. In addition to this, there's in Phoenix, an aeroplane couldn't land because the tarmac was actually starting to melt due to extreme temperatures that were being experienced in Sierra Nevada, all across the United States, all across, you know, India, most of Asia, here in Southern Africa. You had temperatures reaching over 50 degrees, 50 degrees and above. This is, you know, almost a continued kind of problem, month in and month out. In Karachi in Pakistan, they're experiencing such water shortages that the intensity of what's going on there is actually forced for the first emergence of what we're going to call climate refugees. These are people that are fleeing a certain area because the climate has shifted so dramatically for so long that they are no longer able to exist in a previously known area of existing, in this case Karachi, Pakistan. They're saying that it's applying massive political pressure, it's applying massive human misery. In Ethiopia, they're back to having one of the longest droughts they've ever had in 50 years. This is also implied in terms of famine. The tornado season is just warming up in the United States, but for the first time China starts experiencing tornadoes. Tornadoes are being experiencing earlier and earlier, almost year on year, every single month, for the last year and a half. A new climate record has been broken almost everywhere in the world. Most of Europe has been experiencing flood after flood after flood. It's becoming like the new normal. And yet you still have people that run around thinking, hey, well, you know, we can be okay like this. We can carry on doing exactly what we do and be okay like this. Well, I got some news for you. I mean, you know, Einstein once said that the moment that bees die off, that within the space of 5 years, most humans will die off too. And I'm not sure of the exact phrasing, was actually something similar to that. And the reason why he said that is because bees are a corner key species, meaning that their pollination ability is you know, it's unbeatable. Pollinate more flowers. The loss of bees, you lose the pollination. Now a new report coming out trying to first of all find out why all those bees are dying all over the world, because bees are dying all over the world. But they also seem unable to locate their food source, their pollination source. And it has just been shown that they're failing to find their pollination source simply due to the volume of air pollution that is in the atmosphere. Bees are the tiny micropollutants that are associated with carbon monoxide have had such an extreme reaction to bees that it is confusing them. They're unable to smell where they're going, they're unable to signal to the rest of the hive where to find the pollen, and this is causing a mass dieback in terms of bees. On top of this, then you have the added kind of negative that comes from Monsanto's drive towards nicotine-based kind of fertilizer, nicotine-based pest control, and the impact that it's had on bees. In many countries around the world, it's been made illegal, so you're no longer allowed to use nicotine-based kind of pesticides on crops. But still, the impact that it had on the bees as a species is dramatic and huge. Now, mussels, which is a common kind of food dish that people have from all over the world, it has now just been shown that due to the increasing acidity of the water, due to the increasing temperature of the water, that mussels will likely be off the menu of the world within 85 years. Now, that may seem like a long period of time, but understand, it doesn't, you have mussels, you have mussels, you have mussels every single day up until 85 years, in which case they dramatically fall off. It is a slow deterioration of mussels all around the world until you get to the point that it is no longer commercially viable to actually harvest mussels for the table because it's just too expensive. So I want you to consider something now. If you look at it, you've got all of these extreme kind of events that are happening. But you're not hearing about it on any other channel. I mean, you hear about it on my channel, but you're not hearing about it on any other channel. You hear every now and then, hey, there was a flood there, or hey, there's a raging wildfire there. But the fact is that something is happening. Now, it just happens that it corresponds with an increase in global temperatures. News reports that came out saying that we're no longer able to keep the global temperature between 1.5 to 2 degrees. This is serious news. It's serious. But it was never reported anywhere else. It's basically reported here and to those scientists that actually took the time to go ahead and read it. And so I wondered to myself, why? Like, why is it that it's not covered? Why? What is the problem here? And then I remember a couple of words that my producer doesn't really want me to talk about, but I think I'm going to just use it anyway. And that is that a lot of people seem to think one of three things. First of all, that climate change is somehow a hoax. That climate change was some kind of fraud perpetuated by Al Gore. And third, that climate change is some kind of means of taxing the population. It's a means of further redistributing wealth, your wealth, to the rest of the population. And so, I want to be honest with you, there's only one real fraud or hoax going on here. And that is the fraud that we still believe we can keep polluting. We can keep running around with oil-based and carbon-based kind of fuel sources and keep polluting, and it's going to have zero effect. And if you consider it, when you watch anything, you know, whether it's Al Jazeera or whether it's CNN or anything else for that matter, you're not going to get told that, hey, you know, what you're doing here, this big industry that's worth multi-billions and trillions of dollars, these Saudi princes that drive around merely because they found oil below the ground, do you honestly think they are going to allow national mainstream media to report on the fact that their product, their wealth is derived from the destruction of your environmental future? Do you really think that's going to happen? Of course it's not going to happen. Is that a fraud? I've never in my life heard of a more clear-cut case of fraud. Is it a hoax? It is a hoax for us to believe that we can actually carry on doing this. We cannot carry on doing this. We cannot carry on destroying the planet and thinking there is, you know, absolutely zero effect that is going to happen to us. Because it is definitely going to happen. And if you just start Googling, spend a bit of time actually researching before trolling people that actually have been researching, go out and find out for yourself. Read it up for yourself. We're not making it up here. We are merely reporting on it because nobody else seems capable of doing it. Now, another concept that I've also been thinking about is that a lot of people seem kind of afraid of the idea of what it means to be environmentally sane. And this will address that final point that I made in terms of whether or not it's some kind of wealth redistribution program or some kind of hoax perpetuated by the government to further tax you further. I'm going to give you a picture of what the world could potentially be. Okay? And it's you know, for some of you it's going to be like, oh no, it's a hoax. It's not a hoax. The world is actually not a bad place. People seem to have the concept that somehow, merely because we want things to be done environmentally, that your world is going to change. You've got to go put feathers and shells in your hair, and that everyone's got to go get bongo drums, and they've got to go sit and watch the sun go down while chanting and playing their bongo drums on the beach. And nothing can be further from the truth. What we are referring to here is a variation in the way that business is done. A variation in the way that you are done. You see, my concept for you is very difficult for a lot of very ignorant people to swallow. It's very difficult. And there's a lot of ignorant people out there that would prefer to believe really lame concepts. So I realized quite some time ago, almost 14 years ago, that it was impossible for me to change their minds. Ignorance is bliss in the truest sense of the word. They will run around blissfully denying everything, but the fact of the matter is that they're flawed, they're wrong. And I don't have to change their mind, and neither do you when you talk to them. The reality of what we're trying to do here is about changing the environment around people and not trying to change the person. And what does that mean? It means this. Let's evaluate business based upon the actual result set of that business. Let's take a company. So for argument's sake, I'm going to talk about coal in this instance, which is it's an easy target. So you've got a guy, he's got a coal mine, or he's gone and found a source where coal maybe can be found, okay? And what he does is he will then go geographic kind of surveys. He will establish the how big the vein is, and he will go and he will develop a business plan. He'll present that business plan to coal mining companies. The coal mining companies will assess that business plan based upon the viability of the extraction of that coal and the distribution of that coal into the marketplace and the wealth that can be accumulated from that. And for years, they can operate with a business model like this. Is it such a bad, crazy shift of idea? Is it so scary that we expect that a company that's primary business is polluting our atmosphere to have some kind of impact for polluting the atmosphere, for correcting the atmosphere? And as I said to somebody this morning, I said, you know what? It's not about another rubbish tax, that the government's just going to tax you and they're going to take money from these companies and nothing ever happens from it. The government will just put that tax money into their coffers and they'll sit back and give each other raises and have a nice day. It cannot be in that model. It has to be in a model in which the actual result sets of that company, the funds that come from that company, are driven directly towards cleaning up their product. Is that such a bad thing, that a company is actually responsible for the byproduct of their product? Is it such a bad thing that a company evaluates the viability of a business based on the ability to destroy the environment for not only them, but the entire world population around them? Is that so bad? Is it so difficult to do? Take a look at electricity. A lot of people they spoke about things, the whole green movement is really just about taxing us further so that they can build up these power stations and these renewable stations and increase the cost of our electricity to offset the money that they've spent on renewable energy. And in a way, they are 100% right. They are 100% right. Most countries, including my own country, are going to do that. They are going to build up these massive solar plants and they're going to keep billing people. You will keep paying. There will be no direct benefit, implied or inferred benefit, that is given to you. Can you pause quick? Okay, so my apologies, we were interrupted. I was talking about electricity. A lot of people seem to suspect that what will happen is the government, after making people pay extra for their electricity, for putting up these big, beautiful, either wind farms or concentrated solar farms, or solar, just general photovoltaic solar farms, that the government will keep charging them and increase their taxation merely due to the government's kind of role in wanting to be green and wanting to offset emissions. Now, albeit that the government needs to offset their emissions, and albeit that it is part of their role towards controlling emissions, so moving from a coal-fired power source into a renewable source, this is all really good and well. But it is dangerous for the people that are already struggling with high power bills. So what is the fix to this? Well, we've already seen the fix to this, and there's no reason why this fix shouldn't be done everywhere in the world. Here in South Africa, that we have exactly the same problem, okay? Our government wants to put up solar farms. In fact, our government has put up solar farms. And yes, they bought those solar farms from big, European countries for a far greater rate than what is probably required. And yes, even though we have these giant solar farms or big solar farms, no benefit or direct for the actual consumer of that power is received in any way. In fact, if anything, the price of our power has increased, and this is a fear that is happening all around the world. Again, back here in South Africa, our government then takes a look at its means of resolving this, and so what they do is they propose some trillion rand, and it's a rand for us, but trillion rand nuclear plants, which is actually insane. First of all, nuclear just takes forever to erect. It takes forever. There is never yet. In fact, I will be challenged. I challenge you to find me a single example of a single nuclear plant that is A, being delivered on time, and B, being delivered on cost, which means that the actual implied cost of what they're being offered is never realized at the end of the project. So, that's pretty much it for nuclear. If you consider how long it takes to put up nuclear, if you consider the amount of effort and energy that goes into just mining the uranium for nuclear, and then basically utilize that nuclear in terms of generating energy, and then the disposal of that kind of nuclear waste. I mean, it's a crazy concept. We're splitting an atom to boil water. That's essentially what we're doing. We're flash boiling water, and we're basically driving turbines. But to come back to my point, the problem here has nothing to do with what the government does. The problem has to do with us. The government is under the illusion that they somehow own our grid, where nothing can be further from the truth. The grid belongs to the people. It does not belong to the government. All the infrastructure, installations, coal-fired plants, nuclear-fired plants, any means of generating electricity does not belong to the government. They are merely a short-term custodian of that facility. So the reality is that should the government then say, listen, I tell you what, instead of us continuing to build these ridiculously overpriced kind of nuclear plants, these ridiculously overpriced coal plants, what we're going to do is we're going to roll out renewable energy. And sure, renewable energy, if you go wind turbines, it requires a certain... Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel. My name is Jason Soul, and today we are reporting live from the steps of the beautiful Rhodes Memorial in the Mother City, Cape Town. The Mother Channel is the channel that brings you news, live interviews and current events that are happening around the world in terms of the environment, climate change and various other topics that are related to sustainability. One of the reasons why we're filming from here as opposed to our normal locations in the deep south or near the beach or in the beautiful rolling forests is that we're going to go watch a movie called Normal Is Over, which is a movie that won numerous awards at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a strikingly good story and well done, well put together, and I urge you, if you have an opportunity, to go check it out, see what you think for yourself, and maybe post some reviews about what you think about it below. We will of course add a link below me over here that will tell you a bit about it and give you a little taster of what it's like. The first story, and probably one of the most important stories, is related to the sea levels and the rising of the sea, which has for a long period of time been used by global warming skeptics as an indicator of whether or not global warming is actually happening or not. Now, one of the problems being is they've started recording accurately from space, in this case, sea level rise since 1991. And for a long period of time, there had only been an annual increase of roughly 3 millimeters per year. And for most of this period, global warming skeptics have used this to their advantage to state that global warming is simply not happening. Take a look at the sea levels. Nothing seems to be showing on the sea levels, and thus the entire concept of climate change or man-made climate change is completely flawed. Further analysis of this information has picked up that in 1991, since the records started, there was a massive volcanic explosion. In fact, one of the largest recorded since 1991, and the output of that volcanic ash actually caused a global sea level decrease. And so as a result, the starting block for this data was it started off on a low level, and thus it made a flaw, an ongoing flaw that was picked up inside of the information going forward. And they expect now that the events, or rather the chemical kind of the atmospheric makeup, has started to subside as a result of that volcanic activity. They expect to see a far more dramatic increase in the level of sea level that is happening at the moment. There has actually been a massive reduction in the amount of food being taken up by, in this case, humpback whales. They are one of the toothed kind of whale species. They go along with killer whales and dolphins, obviously, but humpback whales in specific, as part of their hunting kind of lines, they dive down deep below the ocean, they roll onto their side and they scoop up eels that formed a large proportion of their diet. They can hold their breath for 30 minutes, so it wasn't a big problem for them. But as they started studying, trying to see what would happen, they noticed that as ships were passing, that the whales were no longer able to scoop up the fish. They would actually pull out of their dive, and they've realized that either they're picking up the kind of transoceanic traffic as being a threat to them and pulling out their dive, or they are unable to accurately sense where the ground floor is in order for them to turn it over, scoop up their meal. And this is to a certain extent, whales have in a way adapted to the level of noise that is made by this kind of traffic. But this is the first study that goes to show that our impact upon whale species is actually having a longer term negative effect. It remains to be seen whether this impacts other species, but the study is still ongoing. In Croatia, a series of kind of events that took place that basically increased temperatures around the seas, around the oceans, basically caused the dieback of 10,000 fish. Now, this was a huge problem. Thousands of people flocked to the beaches, and they were stumbled across this insane sight where the whole ocean floor was just filled and filled and filled with thousands and thousands of fish dying. And this was a big problem. Obviously, it was a big smell. The authorities basically stepped in. They stopped people from picking up the fish. Obviously, they're poisonous because they've been sitting out in the sun. As it turns out, the water is too hot, and this hotness has basically caused massive oxygen drops inside of the water, which brought about the demise of fish. And the fish were basically trying to escape these zones of low oxygen, and this is what caused the event. Now, although they say it is a semi-natural event, it has never been recorded on this volume before. They've never seen the number of fish species like this before. Very similar event happened just later this week, but this time in Tanzania. And I think what you're actually starting to see is the impact of greater temperatures on the surface of various lakes, closed bodies, and obviously the ocean, and it's starting to play its role. Fourth story, I brought this up. This was in relation to a release that we did. We were talking about microplastics, but at the same time, we also had a discussion about renewable energy. And I went on and on about how China was playing a big role towards, they had an ambition, the termite mind, that basically once it focuses on getting rid of climate change or getting rid of their emissions, that everything kind of just focuses on that and they start acting upon it. Of interest, China, just almost 2 days after I issued that report, issued their statement basically saying that they intend to have 1/5, 20%
of their entire energy requirements completely off-grid by 2030. Now this is a big undertaking. They intend to do it by wind. At the moment, just to show you the kind of extent that they're doing, at the moment China is powered 147 megawatts of their supply from wind. Combined, that is larger and more power than what they're doing in the entire area of Europe, entire area of the United States in terms of wind power. China has also gone ahead and said that this is just the beginning. They're going to try and do more, but adding photovoltaics in their case. And it just goes to show you that when you have a concerted mind driven on the point, getting rid of these harmful emissions caused by coal-fired power stations, nuclear power stations, that you can actually do it, that it is achievable. And not only is it achievable, it's achievable by large economies. We also have to weigh this up with the fact, though, that China basically produces roughly 70% of the world's global emissions in terms of carbon and CO2 emissions and methane, and they cause a lot of damage, but it's a really good step on their behalf, something that they've taken forward and something that we're really impressed about here on the Mother Channel. Our final story is in relation to an event that came out in the United States, and I find this quite ironic because we did cover microplastics and other chemical pollutants that were entering the waterways. Well, in the United States, a new study that's been done has found that there's a kind of toxin, or rather a chemical called PFAS. You can go Google it. As I said, I'll add the link below us. And what it is industrial chemicals that are used in the washing process, also in the manufacture of various bags, manufacturing of different kind of industrial components, often used as a fire kind of retardant in terms of airports and military bases, etc. And they found that roughly 6 million American people are affected by this phenomena of increased toxins inside of the water, increased chemicals inside of the water, and it's having a long-term negative effect, can cause obesity, cause cancer, and obviously have various other genetic effects that can impact upon the populace. And this is just goes hand in hand with that kind of story that we did about microplastics, where we're talking about how we don't really take care of our groundwater, how we don't take care of our waterways, and how the runoff of chemicals is starting to have an impact on people. And here you have a prime example, a study done by MIT in relation to the amount of kind of toxins and chemicals inside the water is now not only detectable, but they believe that the effects may be wider spread, meaning that it's, in this case, it goes across 33 states, but they believe it may be wider spread than that. They believe it may be impacting more people, and that the events or the effects of it are yet to be seen, but it is unacceptably high, and there's very, very little that they can actually do about it. This is water that is done, goes back into the kind of estuaries, goes back into the underground aquifers, and is isolates oxide base critical order, which more is this happens that in and the right just so by of this fear like that the I dimensionally that people find interesting around all the time. This isn't related. As you know, has been 100 parts per million for a bit of time. A standard parts per million into the atmosphere from my roughly 100 considered safe. In this time, had summed itself to be from having the tax oxide generally affected directly than it did in one of my preaching to why into the deep water and keeping a cool atmospheric. But this time, the carbon in this over 400. Now of interest, only history is at 400 parts per 4 million. We were South Pole in catastrophe. That to go in and then not. Also, more alarming to this is that I mentioned to you the figure of where on average we were growing by 2 parts per million annually. But for the first time in Hawaii, the NOAA, which is a Oceanographic Center, it's an American National Oceanographic Center, but they basically measured that for the first time, parts per million rate, so the rate that we're contributing carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, has climbed to 3.02 parts per million. And this has never happened in the history of the world. In the history of the world, it's never happened. Hasn't happened since they've been recording parts per million, which is 58 years. So in 58 years, it's always remained fairly constant, but all of a sudden there's a massive increase. The problem with this is that even though there are some means of sequestrating it, the effects, the net effects of carbon dioxide proliferation around the globe are almost permanent. It takes ages to take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and therefore the impacts in terms of climate impacts wherever you are going to be there for at least the end of your lifetime, the end of your children's lifetime, and the end of your grandchildren's lifetime, unless something is done about it. So that's an interesting kind of take on it. There is, however, a little spin side to this, which is rather interesting. The spin side to this is that there is a what's called in Canada, they have a massive kind of tree species that lives above the 49-degree latitude. So this, in fact, the species is so large in Canada, it's the spruce tree, but they basically have a population that is roughly the size of Spain in terms of forest. Now, before this, they were measuring what the effects of increased temperature would have on these forests. Now, of interest, what's happened is because the increased temperature causes the snow to melt a bit earlier, it increases the amount or volume of water that's available in the soil, which means that roughly, for the first time ever, these forests get roughly an extra 3 to 4 weeks extra growth time. So it means that you have more trees that are able to grow, which is actually a kind of converse spin on carbon dioxide and the mitigation of carbon dioxide, because these species cover roughly 30%, or they are 30% of all tree species, but they contain in their bodies roughly 20% of all the world's carbon. And they're keeping it already in their bodies. The 49-degree latitude goes all the way across Europe into Russia. So it's a massive piece of forest. But the point being is that for the first time, the net impacts that these trees will actually have appears to be beneficial in terms of having increased heat. So they may actually improve our opportunity to mitigate the effects of carbon dioxide. The disadvantage, however, comes from the fact that because there are more trees growing with less water to draw from, that increased growing period may prove negative for other surrounding species. So that's the first kind of subjective condition.
The second subjective condition is that it's on the basis that the climate remains stable, meaning that the temperature in the area remains stable. If the temperature in the area increases further than this and greater latitudes are caused to melt earlier, you're going to have a kind of shake-up of all the events, meaning that there will be more water drawn from the soil, less species surviving, and it could start to unravel. But for the moment, it appears that that is actually going to work. Now, I don't know what's going on in Norway. I don't know. The Norwegian people are, I seem to be talking about Norway quite a lot. And not always in a good thing, because, I smash Norway a lot about that whole dolphin kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, generally the news that is coming out of Norway, the news that they had recently in relation to getting rid of fuel and diesel vehicles completely and switching over to electric vehicles. But now Norway has actually done something else, and they voted in Parliament last week that they want to, so they're already on track to meeting their neutral output in terms of carbon dioxide output by 2030. Now that's 20 years ahead of schedule. They were committed after COP to making that schedule by 2050. But they've become so good at it, the whole focus of their country is so focused on it, that they're actually going to meet their schedule 20 years ahead of schedule. So that means, as a country, Norway may become the first country to be completely carbon neutral. Now, there is a little spin side to that, you see, because that's just popular advertising. It's almost, in a way, propaganda advertising, because Norway also happens to be one of the largest energy exporters in the world. They have plenty of oil reserves that they export, these oil reserves. And so even though Norway itself may remain carbon neutral, the byproduct of their exports may not be taken into account in relation to that. So it would be interesting for me to find out whether or not they are referring to reducing their carbon dioxide emissions enough to actually also account for the usage of their main export. But either way, I think we've got to take our hats off to the Norwegian people. They're spending roughly $3.6 billion a year just to achieve this. And they're going to achieve it. Ironically, their environmental minister, he tried to go against it, not for any other reason other than saying, look, we've been given until 2050. Why must we do it 20 years ahead of schedule when it's going to cost us so much money? But the MPs in Norway are absolutely driven and determined to do it. And my hat's off to them, my respect to them, and we need more leadership like that. But I'm going to revert back to this point once I've just covered another horrible little piece of news. And this news is it's important because many times I've spoken about how climate change has affected various different things. Many times I've discussed about how it affected the lions or it affected different creatures. But we're now at the point where, for the first time, a mammal species has been caused to go extinct as a result of climate change. Now, what is big about this is that it is the first such mammal species recorded to become extinct as a result of climate change. So this species, I'm going to tell you a bit about it, and it doesn't have an easy name. Like, it's not like El Rato or some simple name. It's got like a complex name, and it's something that we need to, I'm going to have to read if you don't mind, so just bear with me. The creature is called Bramble Cay Melomys. Okay. But of interest, it was only found in Bramble Cay, which makes sense, in northern Queensland. And it is a tiny little mouse, basically, that lived on a tiny portion of the Great Barrier Reef. So it was actually an endemic reef species. But the rising tides caused by increased kind of temperature around the globe, caused by extra melt, has caused the high tides to remove its once great. It had 64 hectares of ground that it could run around on and subsistence kind of live off, eat what, I don't even know what they eat. I'm sure they eat used to eat something. But the tides dropped that down to basically where they had 0.64 hectares left in which to range. And that was just enough to wipe out an entire species. So if you think about it, here we had a species that has survived countless extinctions. It survived, asteroid impacts. Its whole chain, its whole branch, its whole genus has managed to get it through to this point of where, okay, it wasn't abundant, but it occupied a niche inside of the world, and it flourished in that niche. It was first identified in 1856, and it was a living species that now will never ever see the light of day again. Now, it's not the first extinction that has happened in our time. We had the yellow sea dolphin, which became extinct due to the amount of toxic junk that has been poured into the rivers around China. But it is an extinction, nevertheless, that is directly attributable to climate change. And so, as a result, I think it's something worth paying attention to. The biologists that were researching this matter said they believe it's just the tip of the iceberg. They believe that there is a lot more mammals and other animals that have been directly impacted by climate change that will never see the light of day. You and I will never hear about it, but it's happening. It's happening. People are changing, things are shifting, the world is changing around us. Now, I'm going to do 3 quick things because I don't like to keep you too long. Generally on the internet, people have a kind of 5-minute lifespan in terms of watching something. So I'm going to give you 3 stories I'm going to cover this week. The first story is in relation to the damming of one of China's last rivers. Every single river in China is dammed, the Yangtze, all of the big rivers have been dammed. There is one last refuge that has been running obviously since China's been about, but now China is looking at putting hydropower on that river, and obviously it's to meet their own kind of climate objectives. They are the largest emitter of carbon dioxide in the world, and they have undertaken amongst themselves to correct that, but that's a big story and it's unfolding soon. The second thing is that in Germany, the German government basically has put forward a motion. Now, it's important that I say put forward a motion and not say they've decided, but they've put forward a motion that by 2050 they're not going to have any more any more diesel vehicles or any more petrol-driven vehicles. So you can see around the world economies are shifting, countries are shifting. There is huge emphasis that has been pouring into the kind of changing of the world to make us more efficient. But the thing that is both remarkable, both in Norway and Germany, and also in Israel, they're also kind of playing a role, is that it takes the people to talk about it. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We are talking about it, we're bringing it to you, you're talking about it, and as a result, we're going to start to shift everybody down the same line. As usual, I'd like to say, I would like to hear from you. If you've got any stories or anything of interest that is happening in your area, we'd like to see it, we'd like to screen it, we'd like to put it on our 24-hour news channel, and more importantly, we'd like to hear from you. So, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for watching. It's going to be a freezing cold day today, but we'll make it. I'll see you at the end of the week. Thanks. Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel, and welcome to the Environmental News Network. My name is Jason Soul, and we are reporting once again from the beautiful, scrumptious Monkey Valley Resort in Cape Town. Over my shoulder you have the lovely, long 8-kilometer unspoiled stretch of Nuruk Beach, and the sun is shining, hallelujah. Today I have some very important stuff for you, and this is really important. This is more important than anything else, because today I'm going to tell you how merely by being a couch potato you are going to save the world. It's going to take 2 things for you to do, and I actually had to toss up to myself on exactly what I'm going to call this episode. Well, not that I have much say over it, but I was either going to call it Waking Up the Sleepers, or I was going to call it How to Save the World by Being a Couch Potato. But I'm going to cover 6 stories quickly. I'm going to kind of go a little fast through them, but I'm going to prove to you at the end of this kind of episode exactly how being a couch potato is going to change the world. So our first story is based around China. Now, as you know, recently China has taken a lot of paddy whacking simply because they went ahead with that stupid Let's Eat the Dog festival. Now, as a person who loves dogs, You know, I think it's disgusting. I really don't understand it. They even post pictures up of them like kind of preparing the dogs, you know, and it really injures me deeply to have to watch images like this. And I understand it's like not my culture, it's their culture and everyone's culture, but I don't like it. But what China has done, or fairly recently has done, is they've decided to halve the amount of meat consumed in China. So their objectives is basically to lower carbon emissions as a result of reducing the amount of intake that the public eats. Now, the government has issued a guideline on how much meat people should be eating in China. Now, I find that a little strange. I think it's a little weird that the government issues a mandate on how much meat people eat. I think it's great, because ultimately at the end of the day, 14.5% of the total emissions of carbon dioxide comes from the cultivation and ultimately the eating of livestock, of pork, of cows, of pigs, you name it. 14.5% of all global emissions merely comes from livestock. And I'm talking CO2, not just talking CO2, I'm talking methane as well. So in China, they've basically said that everyone can only eat 40 grams to 70 grams of meat per day, which obviously, you know, in turn implies that they were eating 80 grams before. They are intending to save roughly 1.015 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide emissions, as well as methane emissions, by the end of 2050. So this is important because, as we already know, that China accounts for the largest production of carbon dioxide in the world, and I think it's a very good initiative of them to take. I'd like to see some more initiative taking place, but for the meantime, in this specific case, China has actually done a good thing. Our story is then going to turn over onto the southwestern parts of the United States, where, as you know, there are massive raging fires going across all of the United States. They're primarily in the southwest, and in this case, southwestern parts of the United States, where these fires have raged, on for almost the last two and a half months. The local fire department believes that they're only 10% contained. But what's interesting here is the relationship between the wildfires that are occurring and climate change. Now, this drove a guy called Michael Mann. He's a professor of climatology and meteorology, to basically release a statement saying, which is why I actually incorporated it, is that you ain't seen nothing yet. Michael Mann basically says, and this is all in Fahrenheit, so they mention 160 degrees Fahrenheit. He says that the persistent drought and persistent high temperatures that are occurring inside of California and the southwestern parts of the United States are causing so much dry fuel for the fire to consume that it's almost impossible to A, stop, and B, that we are actually just on the beginning of what is ultimately going to unravel in terms of too much heat, too much carbon dioxide emissions. And in his case, he actually says it, and I'm going to quote him here. He said, if we continue with business as usual burning of fossil fuels, by the mid-20th century, mid-century, what we think of as an extreme heat today will become a typical summer day. And that is from a professor, Michael Mann, and he's referring to the wildfires that are occurring. It's interesting that he's referring to the wildfires because they're all kind of linked. There's another story that came out in the week saying 66 million trees in California have died as a result of drought. Now, as you know, that these are all kind of interrelated. If you remember last week, in my last fantastic release, we were talking about how the warmer weathers have actually created a larger growing window for species above the 49th degree latitude, so tree species, but the increase in species has caused more drought because there's more kind of plants drawing. Geez, bird, chill, dude. Wow, that bird was just freaking out. Final parting shot. Had to get it off. So now we're talking about in California that there's a massive drought. It's been going on for quite a bit of time in California, but as a result of it, there has been roughly 66 million trees estimated to have been lost. Now, they've lost in two ways. First of all, the drought itself has caused many trees to die. But what that's done is that's invited beetle to basically come in, start eating the trees, and that's caused a beetle infestation. And this is actually a massive problem. And if you go back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of Michael Mann and his topics about how the heat is causing the driving kind of wildfires, I think that you're actually looking at two stories starting to unfold that are ultimately going to coalesce into a single story. And I think you're likely going to find that the story from last week in relation to above the 49th degree latitude, those trees, I think it's going to coalesce into these stories too, which is the thing that I find amazing about what's going on in our industry, in climate change, is how all the little bits and pieces of story are starting to come together to form one big scary picture. So talking about a scary picture, there is a scientist, in this case his name was Professor Jeremy Owens, who's a geologist, and he did something quite clever. He went back and took a look at ice samples to determine exactly what effects the increase in carbon dioxide levels would have upon the oceans. As you already know, we've already discussed ocean deoxygenation and ocean acidification as a result of the increase in temperatures. Now he wanted to find out, what potentially could be the end result of this all. How bad could it go? And so what he did was he had to dig really far. He had to dig back to 94 million years ago in order for him to find out exactly what kind of conditions we can expect as a result of our continued use of fossil fuels and our continued lack of caring in terms of emissions. And what he found was that 94 million years ago, once the carbon dioxide levels reached where they are now, there was massive dieback. First of all, it started off with a loss of proteins inside of the water, which in turn ultimately got rid of certain species that were feeding at the top of the water, which in turn caused deoxygenation in the water, which in turn drove massive extinctions throughout the oceans. Now, don't you find this story a little bit similar to the story that we told earlier, about 3 weeks ago, in relation to the deoxygenation of the ocean? Here is a guy that basically had to go back 94 million years in order to find out what would happen. And here we are, 2016, and you seeing it starting to happen. I think it is time, if anything, to start worrying about this. But of more worry would be if you were an environmentalist in this day and age. Environmentalists generally are considered tree huggers, people that run around and they try to do good things. But there is a record that was made inside of this week, and it was in relation to the murder of environmentalists and people that are ultimately trying to stop the onslaught of big business against our natural resources. So far, there have been 185 murders. Primarily, even though spread over 16 countries, most of the murders took place in Brazil. Now you find that interesting. Brazil is at the forefront of where people are trying to stop the logging that's going on in the Amazon rainforest, the slashing and burning that's going to cultivate soy crops, etc. And instead of people trying to work out a way and understand that maybe the impact of their product on the environment is so bad that they would actually just look at doing something else, look at making another way instead, they found it easier to murder people. And I think this is coming to a point where you're going to see a lot more of this. You're going to see a lot more of this. And just for the record, I'm just a presenter in this case. I really, I'm going to try and stop a whole lot of people. But please, I kind of like living. I like listening to the sound of the bird. I don't want to get murdered for my interests, and I think if anyone is going to be doing murdering, I don't know, go back yourself maybe if you're a destroyer or polluter of the environment. But all of this brings us together to the actual reason why I was so excited about today. You see, because today is going to be a day that I am going to tell you how to fix the environment. And now, one of the common problems that we had ever since we've started, in fact, in anything to do with climate change, is that people have this lovely line that they like to do. Oh, what can I do? What can I do about climate change? And then they carry on destroying the environment. That's what they do. And so I'm going to tell you the easiest, fastest way to fix climate change, to fix the environment, and everything else, and all it will require is two things. That's all you got to do. The first thing you got to do is you just have to watch. Isn't that amazing? Like, you just have to watch stories like mine, not just mine, stories that are being spoken about by, but you have to start informing yourself about what's going on in the environment. You see, one thing that I've known about Environmental News Network is every time I seem to do my research on what's going on in the world of environmental science or climatic science, the one thing that is a resounding obvious thing is that the major news networks have zero interest whatsoever in covering any of these stories. So to a large extent, you're being kept in the dark. You're actually part of what I like to call the sleepers. Now, I'm going to come to this and explain to you how you're going to wake up the sleepers. It is going to be your responsibility. So what's going to happen now is this. All you need to do is watch this presentation. Watch other presentations that are like mine. Fill your head with the facts that I'm talking about. I'm not making these up. I'm not sitting there going, hey, you know what, I feel like talking about the southwestern drought at the moment. I'm not making it up. This is publicly available information that is relevant to what is going on in the planet. And it is super important. Do you know, while we were talking about the death of the Great Barrier Reef, the CNN was talking about Donald Trump. How important is that? Which would you rather have, Donald Trump or the Great Barrier Reef? You decide. But the point is, by watching it, you're informing yourself. And what happens is this. In Germany, I mentioned this inside of my last discussion. It's my first link that I've done with a previous show. But in Germany, they put forward a concept. Politicians put forward a concept, and they basically said by 2050, we're going to have no more diesel and petrol-driven vehicles. Now, what happens inside of any democratic political process is it's a bunch of air-speaking people that are going to find out whether or not that position is supported by the electorate underneath them. Now, if the electorate underneath them has absolutely no idea of what's going on, and they just set their minds on focusing on watching Al Jazeera, CNN, what's going on with the Kardashians, when the politician comes to them and says, what do you find important? They're going to spit out the usual garbage, jobs, they're going to spit out, whatever, crime. They're going to spit out things that are relevant to them. It's true, they are relevant, but they're going to miss out on the big picture. The big picture is, in a few years' time, in fact, a report that's just been released saying by 2035, 33% of the world will be in severe water restrictions, is a big story. You can have crime, you can have a job, but if you've got no water, you're going to be having a rough day. But if you let the politicians know that, hey, I'm awake, I know what is happening in the world, what happens is you form part of a demographic. And the politician then looks at that demographic and he says, the people that elect me, pay my salary and ensure that I can drive around in my big fancy BMW are really concerned about climate change. That's what they're concerned about. What do you think is going to happen to that bill when it is tabled inside of the German parliament? It's going to find overwhelming support. It's going to find overwhelming support because that is what people are concerned about. And all of a sudden, legislation for Germany is going to change, and they will ban the use of petrol and diesel-driven vehicles by 2050. And so what I've just done for you is an incredible thing. I've actually just showed you that merely by watching something, in this case me, and merely by letting yourself be aware of what's going on and sharing it, you are actually able to change the world. You're actually able to change what's happening in the environment. The politicians will jump to whatever the electorate is telling them to jump to. You are the electorate, you have a voice, and now you have knowledge. Now, I tried this out myself, okay, because it sounds really easy, okay, just watch me and we're going to change the climate, okay, but I I gave this a test drive myself, okay, and I'm going to tell you this is crazy difficult, okay. I sat down with the people that I was surrounded with, and I these are people, they're like normal people, man. They go to work, and they watch TV and they drink too much on the weekends or too little on the weekends or whatever, and they have a good life. And so in the middle of a conversation, I said, listen guys, how many of you know exactly what happened at the Great Barrier Reef? They're like, they knew nothing about it. They wanted to watch a rugby or they wanted to do their thing. I said, okay, how many of you have heard about deoxygenation of the ocean? And then I sparked up of the group, I sparked up some interest from a few, and I explained to them what deoxygenation of the ocean was. Now, I'm not a scientist, just explained it to them, I just shared it. And yes, there was like a glazed look in a lot of their eyes, it's true. But the reason why that glazed look is there is because they're asleep. People all around you are asleep. If you're watching this, you're not sleeping anymore. You're aware that there is a problem, you're awake to the problem, and you're educating yourself. But it's going to be lost on you unless you share it. And so what I'm going to challenge you all to do, and I want you to try this, I want you to email me on the results set to this, is I just want you to share. Take any information you like, anything that I've spoken about you like. And you sit down with a group of your friends, and in the middle of any conversation you like about absolutely anything, whether it's Brexit, Donald Trump, how Hillary is a liar or not a liar, whatever the conversation, ask them, sorry, do you know what deoxygenation of the ocean is? Do you know what acidification of the ocean is? Do you know that by 2030, there's going to be 33% of the world is going to be at a loss for water? You see, the problem is that most of them are only aware of what they are being fed on national news broadcasters and what they're being told about junk things, sport and geopolitics and things that are not really that important in the scope of what's going to happen. So you can actually see the slow awakening in some of their eyes. And it is important for you to share the message of what I'm telling you and to share your own message. Research the info yourself, share the information, and start to wake people up. Because when you do start to wake people up and you get a whole group of people all talking about the same thing, the same topics, the same concerns, then all of a sudden those politicians, when they're canvassing, looking for support, that demographic that includes those lists of people that you've spoken to is going to start to change. When it starts to change, legislation will change. When legislation changes, governments change. When governments change, we start correcting climate change. And so that is the chain of events. I want you to try it. Tell me how it went. Even if you like, make a little recording of yourself and tell me how it went. Let's have a conversation if you want. And yeah, so give it a crack. Let me know, and let's have a discussion about it. My last little coverage or topic of the day that I'd like to do, because I don't want to put people to sleep, but the last topic that I've got today is in relation to a meeting that we had last week that was relating to new business. I said to somebody, I said, hey, listen, man, and I was telling him about how I'm trying to change the world and how I'm trying to change people and how hard it is. And he said, Jason, you're never going to change the world, because until new business gets off this concept of GDP growth, a German guy, Rolf, very nice guy actually, but until it gets off this concept of growth, until businesses are assessed based on greenness, we'll never change it. And he's absolutely right to a certain extent. He's right. Why is it that, they muted carbon tax here in South Africa? Why is it that it receives resistance? Why is it that when a coal company wants to open up a new coal shaft and they put forward a business proposal, why is that business proposal only judged based upon the results of the financial return? Why is it that they don't incorporate? Remember, we had the story about these coal ash ponds that were leaking arsenic and thallium into the water systems that were poisoning people. Now that's the result of the business. That is what the business contains. That business, albeit that it does give back returns to investors and it does provide jobs, at the end of the day, in as much as it provides the benefit, it also needs to reflect the offset. Why is it that companies are not assessed based on this, and based on this almost equally by comparison to the amount of profit that is returned from such an investment? How is it that we always
are looking to expand and expand and expand, when we're not actually looking that that expansion requires resource withdrawal in order to maintain it, to sustain it. These are the problems that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about more about this next week. Ralph had some really, really clever ideas, and I'd like to bring those up to you because I think they're viable. And at the same time, I've given it a lot of thought myself. But for the meantime, I'm going to round up this episode, and I just want to end it on this, and I cannot explain to you how important this is, but we can change the world. You and I can change the world merely by watching, merely by informing yourself, and then trying to wake the sleepers. Just try to wake the sleepers. Make everybody talk about it. Be the person at the table. Watch that glazed look in their eyes clear out as you're talking about the fact that their grandchildren are going to be finished. And it's not their fault. It's not their fault. They've just been fed only information that big business, big money wants them to hear about how, some tennis match is sponsored by a watch company, how a bunch of rich people go sailing around on boats in yachts, and how Brexit is going to affect the macro European economy. I mean, at the end of the day, it's all meaningless. It's meaningless if you don't have a planet to exist on. You've got to change the conversation, and it starts with you, and I want you to share it. I want you to share it. I want you to be the me sitting at that table amongst all those people. I want you to start to take responsibility for just talking about it. If you work in a company, try it. Try it. In your next meeting, Monday morning, everyone's sitting there hungover, pissed off that they've even got to work. Just try it. Just say, sorry, I just wanted to know what we're planning to do about climate change. Everyone's going to look at you. Some people will throw papers at you. Some people say, climate change is a hoax, because they're brain dead. But the reality is, you're starting the conversation. And that's how we're going to change it. You watch me, I watch you, hopefully, if you send something in. You watch me, I'll inform you. You go out and you share it. Share it. Let them know that we're not going to put up with it. We are going to change climate change. We are going to end it. So I want to thank you for your time. The sun is still out, so still a beautiful day, and I hope wherever you are, you're having the most freaky, awesome day you've ever had in your entire life. And go share that news tonight, and let's see what happens. Thank you very much. This is Jason Saul, reporting from Monkey Valley Resort. Thank you. Hello and good morning, and welcome to ENN Network. We are filming in the lovely Monkey Valley Resort. Slightly different view today. They're kind of working around us, so things are going a bit wild. Got 5 stories for you, pretty much from last week. We are a day off having a full week summary, but the big story of last week was Greenland, which set its melt records in 2015. And this is quite important because according to climate change and climate models, Greenland has an effect called the Arctic amplification. And what that really does is it's based around increase in energy in the northern hemisphere, specifically around Greenland and the Arctic. And the net result of that increase in energy is increased runoff in terms of water runoff from the Arctic. And what that does is it upsets the jet stream. And what the jet stream does is that it moves a bit slower, but it also carries warm air across to Greenland, which in turn amplifies Greenland's own kind of warming cycles. So, before this was always theorized. It was something that wasn't put down as a solid fact, like any theory, any scientific theory for that matter. But for the first time, it's now been proven. It's now actually met the principles of Arctic amplification. And I think we can safely say that it's happening. In another kind of turn of events, some important things actually happen in terms of carbon sequestration. For a long time, scientists have been puzzling about how to get rid of the excess CO2. As you know, we're sitting on 433 parts per million at the moment.
which is only 133 parts per million above safe, you know. So they've been looking at means of sequestration. So sequestration, obviously, there's natural sequestration, which I've explained to you in terms of you know, how phytoplankton goes and absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and changes it, and how trees absorb carbon dioxide, build their body with the carbon. But this is a man-made kind of means of carbon sequestration. It's been tried in a few different ways. In Australia, they tried it by liquefying the carbon dioxide, then pumping the liquid down into old abandoned mine shafts. You know, a couple of labs have come up with some pretty intelligent ways to do it, but none of them really cash feasible. And then in Iceland basically made a massive breakthrough last week, which was they figured that if you were to take CO2, add a bit of water to it, and a bit of sulfide to it, and you inject it back into rich basalt. So in Iceland, they've got a lot of you know, areas that are dense in basalt, and they injected it back into the basalt. Now the trick here was that everybody said the process of it converting from its liquefied form of CO2 into a hardened form of CO2 would take anywhere between 8 to 12 years. And even then, it was considered to be, you know, too fast to be practical. But the big breakthrough came that the carbon not only turned itself into a solid block of carbon, but it did it within 2 years. Which means that effectively Iceland has just discovered the most rapid way to converting carbon dioxide into a solid, stable, secure source that can be stored forever underground for pretty much as long as you like. Basalt is a very common rock substrate that's found all around the world. And so this is actually a very viable means of carbon sequestration. And it's something that you can bet they're going to be doing a lot more in the future. And then, obviously, if you've been keeping an eye on CNN, they also brought this story up, but it's in relation to the first time inside of tropical downpours and inside of heavy kind of climate conditions that they've actually been able to detect what they call the fingerprints of climate change. Now, you know, climate change, remember, is a theory, although obviously as it's going on, it's becoming more and more you know, solidified in terms of what they're projecting is actually happening. But for the first time, they've actually were able to take map models based over the downpours that occurred in both France and Germany, and they were able to predict with a degree of accuracy, in this case was 80% and 90%, the likelihood of the Rhine rising, first of all, and then flooding. And they predicted it at 90%, and they predicted a 4.5 meter climb in terms of based on the weather patterns and based on the rainfall patterns, where in fact they were pretty close. It actually turned out to be a 6.1 meter rise in the river, and that's pretty much what's caused all your flooding throughout most of Europe, in fact anywhere connected to the river. These other two stories are a bit more recent, but they're both sort of, you know, quasi-related. They've done a study on what's called coal ash ponds. Now, coal ash ponds are, you know, places where coal kind of factories or coal mines, they will get rid of waste water, waste product, and they will leave it in an ash pond. And these ash ponds can be giant. Now, in the United States, they did a study on 21 coal ash ponds, and some of these are like long abandoned coal mines. And what they've done is they determined how much of that coal ash was actually staying stable and staying within the coal ash pond itself. But what they found was that the coal ash pond was actually leaking toxic materials into the water aquifers, so the sub-aquifers. And all around these various different locations, they were picking up high levels of selenium and arsenic in water, unnaturally high levels. And in some places, the farmers had even started, you know, plumbing into these with boreholes, drawing out that water and spraying it over crops. So what essentially you've got is you've got a proliferation of arsenic.
another thing that's of concern about this is that in South Africa we're a massive mining economy. I mean, that's how we make most of our money. Likewise in Mexico, some of the biggest coal mines, Russia, Australia, United States is always kind of like the canary in the cage kind of thing, because they actually take the time to go and do the research, go and do the studies. And when they release studies like this, it's got to make you think. In the United States, they also have some degree of legislation as to how they're supposed to store these kind of toxic materials, whereas in other countries they may have kind of lower standards of how they store these toxic materials. But the important part here is that that even in the United States they were finding massive levels of contamination, cross-contamination. Now, can you imagine what the effects of those are on third world economies or on countries that don't have as higher standards in terms of storage? And I think that this is a problem that is probably all around the world, and it's something that with urgency we should actually take a look into. My final story of the day, something which really bothered me, up in Tanzania. I'm in South Africa, so it's up for us. In Tanzania, they have been recording how hippos have been accumulating towards the end of a dry season. There's been increased aggression. As you know, hippos are one of the largest kind of land mammals that we've got here in Africa. But there's been a whole lot of aggression, a whole lot of infighting, and in fact, a large proportion of them have actually been dying back. And scientists then went to go study why this seems to be a recurring issue. And what they found is that as the amount of rainfall is getting less and less, a lot more farmers and a lot more people are drawing more and more water from the river. And what this is doing is in these massive parks, they're basically draining the rivers for other wildlife to use, so for the hippos to use. So where before only right at the end of the dry season would the hippos start to make these overnight migrations, they're now actually starting to make these migrations a lot earlier. They're starting to look for new sources of water, mainly because man's impact and the impact that we're having on the environment around them is reducing their probability of survival. Already here in South Africa, they've just declared all of our provinces, well, 7 provinces, they've declared them, disaster drought areas. They actually declared it as a disaster zone. And then on my way here, I just heard that Windhoek in Namibia is going to be out of water by November. And this seems to be like kind of a growing problem. At the forefront of climate change, you always have kind of climate extremes that are occurring. There you see in the Rhine, the River Rhine, rising 6.1 meters and flooding down a whole lot of houses. You're getting a whole lot of unnatural weather conditions that are occurring around the world, including in the Arctic, where they're basically breaking up the jet stream and it's carrying more heat into Greenland, which is in turn causing more melting in Greenland. And all of these problems are actually interconnected. But the difference here with the hippos is, at this point, big atmospheric conditions, outside of whether it rains or doesn't rain, but big atmospheric conditions are starting to have direct impact upon creatures, upon animals, and ultimately upon us. We will be carrying the cost of all of these kind of interventions that we do, this persistent dumping of toxic materials into areas that potentially can be they can go out and later leak into sub-water aquifers. You've heard all of the stuff with fracking. They had that movie that went viral on the internet where the guy was able to actually set his river on fire. I mean, it was on fire based on the amount of methane that was on the water. So the fact is that as a species we are completely reliant on water. You can go without food for a few days, but go without water and the world is going to be a very different place. My fear is that we are getting faster and faster and faster into a point where water is actually going to start to play a real part in our lives. And I think there is a time for us to do something, and I think that time is now. So I'd like to hear more about water issues, or I'd like to hear more about any events that are happening in an area near you that are related to water. I think it's a story that we need to track. I think it's something that we need to talk about. If you've got anything, if you've got any news footage that you'd like to bring forward and let us put out and put it on our live stream, please bring it on. We're waiting for it. We're ready for it. But until then, I'll chat to you at the end of the week, and have a good week.
Hello and welcome to the Environmental News Network. I'm Jason Sol, and we are filming in the beautiful Rua Constantia in Cape Town. It's historical gardens, one of the first, in fact the first wine estate here in South Africa, and beautifully belongs to all the people of Cape Town, but locally managed, but just, you know, it's a beautiful place, and anybody that's coming to South Africa, I urge you to come and spend some time here. It's a beautiful environment to be in. As usual this week, I'm going to summarize a couple of the stories of this week, and then I've just got a couple of things I want to throw out at you. So it's Sunday today. The big stories of this week was basically based on the renewable energy systems. A professor in Harvard developed what they're calling a bionic leaf, which turns sunlight into a liquid fuel. This has been done quite a few times. Sorry, the dog is just galloping around, so no issues about the dog. But this has been done a few times, but never with this degree of success. This study has actually made it more efficient to produce liquid fuels from sunlight. I don't know why personally. I mean, I think it's a great technology, but I don't know why personally they're still persisting with the whole, you know, liquid fuel kind of concept. I really like, you know, electric vehicles, renewable powered vehicles. I think that's the future. I think, you know, research, albeit that it's good research and an interesting development, I really believe that we should be more focused on developing technologies that are going to be usable for the future, as opposed to trying to still keep with this ridiculous kind of, we need to burn things in order to, you know, create power for ourselves. I mean, we've got to move away from this. The second story which I wanted to cover is quite interesting. They've just recently concluded a study of fish larvae and the impact of microplastics on fish larvae. And so the study can now conclude, so it's got a conclusive result which shows how microplastics are able to retard the growth of fish larvae. They also create weaker fish, so fish that are more susceptible to environmental changes, fish that are more susceptible to pollutants in the water, and fish that have shorter lifespans. Now, albeit that, you know, that's interesting and all, when you combine the stories, which is invariably what I find to be quite a way, you know, it's how you should be looking at it, as a larger picture instead of a micro picture. But when you combine it with the information that they released about 3 weeks ago, showing the level of plastics in the water, the level of microplastics in the water, and then at the same time they also showed you the kind of, you know, how long plastics are taking to biodegrade. I mean, you're talking like thousands of years. You're talking, yeah, I don't know if you know those like kind of helium-filled balloons, those shiny silver balloons that like never biodegrade, ever. You know, they will just never, they will persist forever. So if you bear that in mind as to how much kind of pollution is in the ocean, where before it was kind of isolated to various hotspots in the Pacific Ocean, now you can go and take a cupful of water, any sea, anywhere in the world, and you will pick up a degree of micropollutants, well, microplastics inside of the water. Some kid came out with a technology, I'm sorry, but I can't remember where, but I think it was somewhere like Norway or Denmark or somewhere like this, that it was a mechanism for taking plastics out the water. Just hold on a second, I think we may have a little baboon encounter going down. I think we better just pause. So okay, we're back. We're back. We had to pause for a brief while to put the dog in the car. just in the tree line behind us here, we have a troop of baboons that are coming down, and again, they have put me in a great environment. Fortunately, you know, I don't know, I may blend in with the look of the baboons, who knows, man. You know, so if I die while filming this, let's just say I gave myself for science and informing the world about information. So we will see. If I get attacked by a baboon in the middle of the show, then hey, at least it's got a bit of a, like, you know, a watch for you.
Make good television.
Yeah, it makes good TV. It will make good TV if I get assaulted by baboons. Okay, but anyway, let's just come back to microplastics quickly. So anyway, what I was talking about was how you need to combine stories, you know, and they were talking about how much microplastics in the ocean, and how you can take a cupful of seawater around the world, anywhere around the world now, and there is a certain degree of microplastics inside of the water. And then I was talking about this kid that came up with this technology, and everyone's going, "Whoa, yeah, you know, great, what an amazing kid!" And he came up with this thing that takes plastic out the water, and it's not a very complex system. It's basically like a big strainer, if you will. So the thing is that even though you're taking out large debris or large clumps of plastic out the water, which is important, you know, to remove it from the water, at the end of the day, the microplastics, the contaminants from microplastics are going to be there forever. And even though you're removing them, you've actually got to figure out a way to remove microplastic, not necessarily just wholesale large plastics, which obviously is the end result of large plastics is microplastics. But you actually need to work a bit more at the science, which is kind of lacking in this regard. So that was quite an interesting story, you know, that came out, just showing the impact that these microplastics are having on fish. So if you think about it, okay, now the birds are flying away. Okay, great, that's fantastic. So if you think about it, other wildlife is afraid of the baboons, but we're fine, you know, we're good. Okay, so if you think about it, the combination of all these stories, you know, if you start putting them together, we're creating a picture here, which is not a very good picture. You know, the EU released that report that spoke about water in 2050, showing that there will be a 6% decline in overall GDP, worldwide GDP, and most of the world will be water starved, if not water stressed. And I found this, you know, this was really quite interesting that they would come up with something like this, that they would issue a report out on something like this. And then I switched over to CNN, because I do keep an eye on what's going on in CNN. And you know, it's like it never happened. It's just like it, you know, it's like they may as well have said nothing. You know, again, they were covering, you know, stories that, you know, so the South Korea leader, and they covered that, and they covered a story that had to do with how Donald Trump is going to go visit Europe to open up his golf course, and he's arriving at the time that the UK is deciding, are they with the European Union or are they out of the European Union, and they covered that, and it astounds me that such a heavy report can come out and nothing is said of it. It's not even mentioned. It's like we're on a different planet. So I spent quite a bit of the week trying to figure out, you know, why is it? You know, why is it that we're not talking about this? Why is it that the world is not freaking out, man? I mean, why are we not freaking out about this? Why are we not running around in a mad panic? And then I realized that, you know, a lot of us are all in the same kind of boat. A lot of us experience a circular existence. You know, like things are, you know, that wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. You know, day in and day out. It's the same thing we do. We live in the circular existence, and some of us are fortunate, and you can break out of that circular existence and make a phenomenal amount of money and be some famous person lying on a beach while people pamper you with palm leaves. But for the majority of people, we are stuck in this circular world. And in a way we're bored with this. In a way we've become so bored with the circular existence that we seek out drama in our lives that we can make important to ourselves. And you can see this, that, you know, why are people freaking out about them finding a black box in the Mediterranean that showed how a plane went down? Why is it really relevant to anyone? Why is it even spoken about here in South Africa? I mean, what has it got to do with any of us? You know, and it's a tragedy, don't get me wrong, but why is it? We seek it out and we talk about it because we're trying to add some color to an otherwise circular existence. We're trying to add some kind of meaning to an otherwise fairly dull, repetitive pattern of Monday to Friday we either work or you don't work, but Monday to Friday you work, and then Saturday you either drink too much, you exercise too much, or you go to church, or whatever your thing is, and you do this 52 weeks a year for the rest of your life. And what scares a lot of people is that you get to a certain age where you'll go to a restaurant, for argument's sake, or you will go to, you know, you'll go to the beach and you'll see old people, and like really old people. You know, they're grey hair, and the lady is either walking, carrying the guy, because ladies always seem to live longer than us guys, and that's in line for all of us. All of us are going to be those people that our entire life, our entire existence amounted to that. We will live our lives and end our lives and nobody will know. Nobody will know. We'll never make a significant difference upon anything in the world. And so what we do is we tend to seek out drama to fill in or add color to our lives. And CNN operates on a bell curve where what people are talking about, and they choose to highlight that and make stories about that, so that you and I have something that takes away the kind of mental concept of where we're going. But I have a challenge for all of you that are watching this, and I've really thought this through. You see, there is actually in our time a revolution that needs to happen, and it is like your last revolution. It is an opportunity for you to make a real difference, to make a change in the way that this world is going, in the way that we are just cycling ourselves to the end, having a meaningless existence while the entire planet all around us and everything that we consider beautiful is slowly being whittled away until there is nothing left. There is news that is released this week that spoke about a 2030 date. This is 14 years away. 14 years away, in which the level of heat and the level of pollutants and the level of kind of topsoil losses that are getting into the ocean are lowering the kind of, you know, the ability of phytoplankton to absorb kind of CO2 and release oxygen. As you know, that phytoplankton, in fact the ocean, makes a large proportion of our oxygen. It was estimated to be around 60%, 65% of our oxygen. And the way that we are kind of, the things that we are doing to reverse this are not fast enough. They're just not enough. And nobody is really talking about it except for us here on ENN, the Mother Channel, and a bunch of scientists that are actually researching it. And there's a lot that we can actually do. We can change the way that we are farming. A beautiful report got put out in Norway that was done by one of the world's leading experts on food and sustainable food practice. And the guy is an expert. He is the foremost authority that was basically saying the impacts of the way that we are farming and the net impacts that it is having on carbon dioxide emissions, the impacts that it's having on the viability of continued growth in terms of food markets, the deficiency of the nutrients that is coming out in food crops based on the way that we're working, the level of pesticides that are not only going into our soils but are also flowing into our oceans. And you know, he talks about a concept which I really like. It's an ecological shift. He called it agroecology. That was his word, actually. So agroecology, he's talking about converting the kind of farming into a more agroecological basis, based upon sustainability, based upon concepts like that are coming out of various different fields, the organic farming, permaculture, and these are lessons that have already been well documented, well studied. It's basic concepts: keeping soil covered, allowing nutrients in the soil to be retained to the soil. Another story that came out this week that is very important, but also it shows you how they're starting to come together. It was based around the extinction rate of river kind of life when you're building hydropower or damming any water for that matter. So what they were showing was the level of extinction that occurs every time you build a hydro plant. Now, previously, hydro plants were considered to be ecologically viable. You know, they were considered to be a green mechanism, and it's true in that the method that they are generating power is a cleaner method for generating power, using the flow of the water to create the current. But what happens is, because they're building these monster-ass dams, and it's a persistent concept of dammed water, released water, pumped water, dammed water, released water. It's on and on. It's a cycle that goes. It wipes out everything inside of the water system below it, because there's no longer any nutrients inside the water. The sediment builds up, is sitting behind the dam. The kind of movement, free movement of kind of foodstuffs and migration of fish life is completely stunted. And it's, you know, the concepts that are starting to emerge and how
Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel. My name is Jason Saul, and today we are reporting live from the steps of the beautiful Rhodes Memorial in the Mother City, Cape Town. The Mother Channel is the channel that brings you news, live interviews and current events that are happening around the world in terms of the environment, climate change and various other topics that are related to sustainability. One of the reasons why we're filming from here as opposed to our normal locations in the deep south or near the beach or in the beautiful rolling forests is that we're going to go watch a movie called Normal is Over, which is a movie that won numerous awards at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a strikingly good story and well done, well put together, and I urge you, if you have an opportunity, to go check it out, see what you think for yourself, and maybe post some reviews about what you think about it below. We will of course add a link below me over here that will tell you a bit about it and give you a little taster of what it's like. The first story, and probably one of the most important stories, is related to the sea levels and the rising of the sea, which has for a long period of time been used by global warming skeptics as an indicator of whether or not global warming is actually happening or not. Now, one of the problems being is they've started recording accurately from space, in this case, sea level rise since 1991. And for a long period of time, there'd only been an annual increase of roughly 3 millimeters per year. And for most of this period, global warming skeptics have used this to their advantage to state that global warming is simply not happening. Take a look at the sea levels. Nothing seems to be showing on the sea levels, and thus the entire concept of climate change or man-made climate change is completely flawed. Further analysis of this information has picked up that in 1991, since the records started, there was a massive volcanic explosion. In fact, one of the largest recorded since 1991, and the output of that volcanic ash actually caused a global sea level decrease. And so as a result, the starting block for this data was it started off on a low level, and thus it made a flaw, an ongoing flaw that was picked up inside of the information going forward. And they expect now that the events, or rather the chemical kind of the atmospheric makeup, has started to subside as a result of that volcanic activity,
they expect to see a far more dramatic increase in the level of sea level that is happening at the moment. There has actually been a massive reduction in the amount of food being taken up by, in this case, humpback whales. They are one of the toothed kind of whale species. They go along with killer whales and dolphins, obviously. But humpback whales in specific, as part of their hunting kind of lines, they dive down deep below the ocean. They roll onto their side and they scoop up eels that formed a large proportion of their diet. They can hold their breath for 30 minutes, so it wasn't a big problem for them. But as they started studying, trying to see what would happen, they noticed that as ships were passing, that the whales were no longer able to scoop up the fish. They would actually pull out of their dive, and they've realized that either they're picking up the kind of transoceanic traffic as being a threat to them and pulling out their dive, or they are unable to accurately sense where the ground floor is in order for them to turn it over, scoop up their meal. And this is to a certain extent, whales have in a way adapted to the level of noise that is made by this kind of traffic. But this is the first study that goes to show that our impact upon whale species is actually having a longer term negative effect. It remains to be seen whether this impacts other species, but the study is still ongoing. In Croatia, a series of kind of events that took place that basically increased temperatures around the seas, around the oceans, basically caused the dieback of 10,000 fish. Now, this was a huge problem. Thousands of people flocked to the beaches, and they were stumbled across this insane sight where the whole ocean floor was just filled and filled and filled with thousands and thousands of fish dying. And this was a big problem. Obviously, it was a big smell. The authorities basically stepped in. They stopped people from picking up the fish. Obviously, they're poisonous because they've been sitting out in the sun. As it turns out, the water is too hot, and this hotness has basically caused massive oxygen drops inside of the water, which brought about the demise of fish. And the fish were basically trying to escape these zones of low oxygen, and this is what caused the event. Now, although they say it is a semi-natural event, it has never been recorded on this volume before. They've never seen the number of fish species like this before. Very similar event happened just later this week, but this time in Tanzania. And I think what you're actually starting to see is the impact of greater temperatures on the surface of various lakes, closed bodies, and obviously the ocean, and it's starting to play its role. Fourth story, I brought this up. This was in relation to a release that we did. We were talking about microplastics, but at the same time, we also had a discussion about renewable energy. And I went on and on about how China was playing a big role towards, they had an ambition, the termite mind, that basically once it focuses on getting rid of climate change or getting rid of their emissions, that everything kind of just focuses on that and they start acting upon it. Of interest, China, just almost 2 days after I issued that report, issued their statement basically saying that they intend to have 1/5, 20% of their entire energy requirements completely off-grid by 2030. Now, this is a big undertaking. They intend to do it by wind. At the moment, just to show you the kind of extent that they're doing, at the moment, China is powered 147 megawatts of their supply from wind. Combined, that is larger and more power than what they're doing in the entire area of Europe, the entire area of the United States in terms of wind power. China has also gone ahead and said that this is just the beginning. They're going to try and do more, but adding photovoltaics in their case. And it just goes to show you that when you have a concerted mind driven on the point, getting rid of these harmful emissions caused by coal-fired power stations, nuclear power stations, that you can actually do it, that it is achievable. And not only is it achievable, it's achievable by large economies. We also have to weigh this up with the fact, though, that China basically produces roughly 70% of the world's global emissions in terms of carbon and CO2 emissions and methane, and they cause a lot of damage, but it's a really good step on their behalf, something that they've taken forward and something that we're really impressed about here on the Mother Channel. Our final story is in relation to an event that came out in the United States, and I find this quite ironic because we did cover microplastics and other chemical pollutants that were entering the waterways. Well, in the United States, a new study that's been done has found that there's a kind of toxin, or rather a chemical called PFAS. You can go Google it. As I said, I'll add the link below us. And what it is industrial chemicals that are used in the washing process, also in the manufacture of various bags, manufacturing of different kind of industrial components, often used as a fire kind of retardant in terms of airports and military bases, etc. And they found that roughly 6 million American people are affected by this phenomenon of increased toxins inside of the water, increased chemicals inside the water, and it's having a long-term negative effect. It can cause obesity, cause cancer, and obviously have various other genetic effects that can impact upon the populace. And this is just goes hand in hand with that kind of story that we did about microplastics, where we're talking about how we don't really take care of our groundwater, how we don't take care of our waterways, and how the runoff of chemicals is starting to have an impact on people. And here you have a prime example, a study done by MIT in relation to the amount of kind of toxins and chemicals inside the water is now not only detectable, but they believe that the effects may be wider spread, meaning that it's, in this case, it goes across 33 states, but they believe it may be wider spread than that. They believe it may be impacting more people, and that the events or the effects of it are yet to be seen, but it is unacceptably high, and there's very, very little that they can actually do about it. This is water that is done, goes back into the kind of estuaries, goes back into the underground aquifers, and is drawn up for use by the municipalities or the councils in order to provide drinking water. And there's nothing you can do in terms of neutralizing the chemicals in it, and thus it brings about a massive problem in terms of drinking supply. Now, you'll probably find, in my opinion, that since it's having a direct impact upon people, that you might find that the municipalities or the councils or the government, they act a lot faster. But I bear with me a little on this, I just find it a little funny that they act upon it when it has a direct impact, that they are able to notice, able to see, they're able to kind of respond to it, but nobody is talking about the other kind of areas that are surrounding it that are obviously awash with chemicals, generally flooding out into the oceans, into large lake bodies, and nobody's really accounting for that, mainly because it's not part of the drinking supply. But obviously it's having an impact on the biology or the biomechanisms of all those ocean species or fish species or algae species or really beneficial kind of requirements of a generally healthy ecosystem. So I think that this is a story that you're starting to see like a little front tip of, and I expect that this is going to go a hell of a lot further very, very soon. Now, we're wrapping this up because we're going to go out and watch that movie. I hope you've enjoyed my update. It's been a little bit chaotic because we're kind of in a public place and a whole lot of people walking up and down, so I expect a few jump cuts here and there. As usual, if you've got any good stories that are happening in an area around you, take a clip, send it in, we'll screen it up. And I would like to thank you for joining me on this beautiful day, well, overcast day for us, but a beautiful day, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you. Hello and welcome to the Mother Channel. My name is Jason Saul, and today we are reporting live from the steps of the beautiful Rhodes Memorial in the Mother City, Cape Town. The Mother Channel is the channel that brings you news, live interviews and current events that are happening around the world in terms of the environment, climate change and various other topics that are related to sustainability. One of the reasons why we're filming from here as opposed to our normal locations in the deep south or near the beach or in the beautiful rolling forests is that we're going to go watch a movie called Normal is Over, which is a movie that won numerous awards at the Cannes Film Festival. It's a strikingly good story, and well done, well put together. And I urge you, if you have an opportunity, to go check it out, see what you think for yourself, and maybe post some reviews about what you think about it below. We will of course add a link below me over here that will tell you a bit about it and give you a little taster of what it's like. The first story, and probably one of the most important stories, is related to the sea levels and the rising of the sea, which has for a long period of time been used by global warming skeptics as an indicator of whether or not global warming is actually happening or not. Now, one of the problems being is they've started recording accurately from space, in this case, sea level rise since 1991. And for a long period of time, there had only been an annual increase of roughly 3 millimeters per year. And for most of this period, global warming skeptics have used this to their advantage to state that global warming is simply not happening. Take a look at the sea levels. Nothing seems to be showing on the sea levels, and thus the entire concept of climate change, or man-made climate change, is completely flawed. Further analysis of this information has picked up that in 1991, since the records started, there was a massive volcanic explosion. In fact, one of the largest recorded since 1991, and the output of that volcanic ash actually caused a